I'm taking you deep into Ellen White's visions of the approaching crisis, when abundance turns to scarcity and souls are weighed in heaven's scales. What is God calling you to learn today? Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts below as we uncover these solemn truths together. The black horse moves with deliberate stride across the landscape of human commerce. Scripture pictures this rider with scales in hand, and Ellen White writes that in the closing work of God, tests will come that strip away earthly supports, revealing who has built upon the rock and who has trusted in uncertain riches. The balances in prophecy measure scarcity. Meanwhile, in the heavenly sanctuary, the righteous judge weighs character and choice. She warns that the time approaches when human props will fail and when loyalty to God may involve restrictions in buying and selling. Yet for those who trust him, bread will be given and water will be sure. This is no mere financial tremor. It is the merciful uncovering of false confidences that have kept humanity from its true source. The famine comes not only as empty granaries and barren fields, but as a spiritual hunger that gnaws at souls who have fed on the world's pleasures. Those who have lived for self find themselves hollow when abundance disappears. Yet those who have learned to feast on Christ's word discover an inward sustenance that no earthly scarcity can touch. White warns that few will be ready because many mistake preparation for stockpiling, accumulation for security. True readiness lies not in filled storehouses, but in hearts emptied of self and filled with faith, obedience, and love. The heavenly judgment reveals this difference with solemn clarity. You have been living in harvest time, but do you recognize winter's approach? White writes in the Testimonies that God's people must learn now what it means to depend wholly upon him. For soon, every earthly support will be removed. The black horse's rider announces prices that make the poor weep and the rich tremble. A day's wages for a day's bread. This is the arithmetic of a world under strain. Yet something remarkable appears. Those who have practiced self-denial, who have learned to live simply and give generously, find themselves equipped for seasons others cannot endure. In mission fields, she observes workers who have already lived on little, who have found joy in service rather than accumulation. When global shortage comes, their lifestyle scarcely changes. They have been preparing without knowing it, building spiritual muscle through small sacrifices that now prove invaluable. But the unprepared panic. Churches that built programs around outward prosperity find their foundations crumbling. Members who attended for status or material blessing drift away when hardship exposes motives rather than comforting pride. The famine sorts humanity into two camps: those who see crisis as God's abandonment and those who recognize it as his call to complete dependence. You will face this choice. Your response will reveal whether you have been building on sand or stone, whether you have learned to draw from wells of salvation or merely from wells of earthly resource. The scales are already moving. The rider approaches. Are you ready? The dawn breaks pale over Gethsemane, and Christ kneels where the weight of worlds presses down. Here, in this garden of surrender, the desire of ages shows what sustains when earthly bread fails. His sweat falls like blood upon ground that will soon crack under judgment's heat, yet he does not call for rescue from the cup. You who worry about tomorrow's provision, look here. See how heaven's prince chooses fidelity over compromise, trust over the easy path. My food is to do the will of him who sent me, he had told them by the well. Now as the black horse's echoes reach your generation, these words return with terrible clarity. While others hoard grain and gold, scrambling to secure what moths devour and thieves steal, Christ points to bread that endures, not the kind that spoils in barns or rots in warehouses, but the daily surrender that turns famine into feast. White writes in The Desire of Ages that in this hour Christ tasted the shadow of separation, an anguish deeper than any earthly hunger. Yet he pressed forward, choosing obedience over ease, mission over self-preservation. The light of his resolve cuts through approaching tribulation, tracing the path of those who will stand when earthly measures register emptiness. You live now in the time of gathering, when hearts reveal their true treasure. Do you reach first for Christ's presence in the morning, or for the news of market prices? When supplies grow short, will you remember that he who fed 5,000 can sustain you with fragments? The black horse measures not merely grain and oil, but the depth of trust in souls who claim his name. In Gethsemane's darkness, light was kindled that no famine can extinguish. Christ's surrender becomes your strength, his hunger, your abundance. The question presses close. Will you drink from his cup of willing sacrifice? Margaret counted the remaining flour. 3 cups, maybe 4, if stretched carefully. Outside, the first reports of crop failure were spreading through the valley like wildfire, and her neighbors worried. Faces told stories their words couldn't capture. She opened selected messages to the page she had marked, reading again how character ripens under trial. The harvest of the soul, she realized, often grows richest when earthly harvests fail. She read that character is not purchased or inherited, nor the accident of favorable circumstance. It is formed by right choices, repeated until duty becomes delight. Margaret closed the book and looked at her. Small kitchen, sparse but sufficient. Her daughter watched from the doorway, fear flickering in young eyes that had never known real want. This was the testing she had read about, but never expected to face. Not the dramatic persecutions of prophecy, but the quiet erosion of trust when abundance turns to scarcity. Would she hoard what remained, calculating and fearful, or would she continue the practice of sharing that had marked her table for years? The black horse's pressure seemed to whisper through her doubt. Protect yourself. Think of your family first. Yet something deeper stirred. A harvest cultivated through years of small choices. The meals shared with struggling neighbors. The portions set aside for those with less. The prayers offered over insufficient provision. Character, she saw now, was being measured not in bushels, but in the automatic response of the heart. When pressure mounted, she measured out enough flour for her family's bread, then took another cup and walked next door. Mrs. Ellis answered with hollow eyes, pride warring with desperation. Margaret simply smiled and held out the gift. The testing had begun, but so had the harvest of choices planted long before the rider approached. What would your character yield when the scales grow heavy? The chronicles speak of other riders who came before, each unpreceded by signs the faithful noticed while the world dismissed them. Ellen White wrote of prophetic scenes opening one after another, each preparing souls for greater trials ahead. In 1844, a great winnowing came. Those who expected immediate triumph met bitter disappointment. Yet from that hour, a clearer light dawned. Heaven's work moves by God's timetable, not human schedules. The lesson then was dependence on Christ's ministry above, not confidence in human calculation. The courtroom of conscience opens its session in every heart. Evidence mounts on both sides, acts of mercy weighed against moments of selfishness, prayers offered against opportunities neglected. She wrote that the books are opened and that every deed has its place in the divine record. But this is not merely cosmic bookkeeping. Each entry represents a choice that shaped character, a decision that prepared or neglected the soul for the hour when abundance would disappear and only fellowship with Christ would sustain. The rider of the black horse does not create famine. He exposes soil that was barren all along. Communities that appeared prosperous suddenly discover whether their foundations rested on sand or stone. Churches that seemed thriving learn whether their unity sprang from convenience or covenant. History repeats because human nature remains unchanged. The same pride that led to Babylon's fall, the same self-sufficiency that preceded every judgment, whispers its familiar lies to modern ears. Yet for those who heed the warnings, the approaching darkness becomes the stage on which light is revealed. The mission field stretched before her like an endless harvest, but Sarah had learned to see with different eyes. Each family she visited, each community she served, carried the potential for either spiritual abundance or devastating want when testing came. In Gospel Workers, Ellen White emphasizes that true ministry fits souls for heaven and for the trials that precede it. Sarah discovered this truth during the town's first real shortage, when the wheat crop failed and fear crept into even faithful homes. The Mitchell family had always tithed faithfully, but when faced with choosing between rent and groceries, their faith wavered. Sarah found them arguing over past generosity, wondering if God had forgotten their sacrifices. The black horse's pressure was already weighing their trust. "Remember," she told them gently, turning to familiar lines, "the Lord measures faithfulness not by surplus, but when resources seem insufficient." She shared how God's order honors self-forgetful benevolence, how trust opens the way for providence, how the body of Christ becomes the vessel for divine supply. The Henderson household told a different story. Years of casual church attendance had left them spiritually unprepared for physical trial. When hardship arrived, they had no reserves of faith to draw upon, no habits of prayer to sustain them, no network of believers to provide support. Sarah realized that her real work wasn't just visiting the sick or teaching Bible studies. She was preparing a community for scales that would weigh every relationship, every priority, every foundation they thought secure. By winter's end, the difference became clear. Some families emerged stronger, having discovered God's faithfulness through scarcity. Others drifted away, their shallow roots unable to sustain them when tested soil revealed its true condition. The black horse rides not to destroy, but to reveal. Sarah's mission continued, knowing that every soul she reached might face the scales with eyes already trained to see heaven's abundance in earth's apparent emptiness. I have read testimonies that recall solemn scenes, and their words burn like coals in my memory. Ellen White writes of visions where the steadfast stood while others fell away as judgments intensified. The black horse's image holds scales in prophecy, but the measurement that matters most is made in heaven's court. The weight of every choice, every moment, of preparation or neglect. In the courtroom of eternity, evidence mounts like scrolls upon the judge's bench. Each day of abundance becomes a witness. Did we learn dependence when bread was plentiful? Each season of ease becomes testimony. Did we strengthen faith when trials seemed distant? The judgment does not weigh what we possessed, but what possessed us. She saw families who practiced simple living, who found sustenance in prayer and community. When shelves thinned, she also saw that plenty can school only appetite unless grace teaches contentment, so that when want arrives, the soul is not wanting. The prosecution presents its case, years of excess, of trust placed in systems rather than the sustainer. The defense offers another record: faithful stewardship, sacrificial love, dependence cultivated in secret prayer. Every soul stands as both witness and defendant. When the black horse arrives, destinies reflect the character already formed by daily choices. The scales only reveal what has been gathering, often unnoticed, in the shadows of habit and desire. In scenes of counsel, the testimonies picture homes where parents teach children to prize service above indulgence, where evening worship outweighs evening entertainment. When shortage comes, these households discover they have been preparing unknowingly, building spiritual sinew in seasons of material plenty. Around simple tables, prayers rise like incense. Gratitude for crusts becomes more heartfelt than former feasts. Children who learned contentment in small things find themselves rich when others discover poverty. The black horse's mission to disclose the heart's true condition reaches its close. Famine becomes both judgment and mercy. Judgment on false dependencies, mercy in leading souls to eternal securities long offered. Those who endure emerge not bitter, but refined, carrying a wisdom abundance seldom teaches. The scales have weighed, the horse has passed, and in the quiet that follows, families gather where little food sits, yet infinite presence remains. They have learned what the rider could only expose, that we do not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God.